The biggest money made in real estate isn't made in construction, it's made before you even buy the land. I found a $4.5 million block of land and was able to turn it into $20 million even before settling on the property. I was able to use a small fee and control the property over a long period of time and increase the value. And I broke these down into 7 key phases that I'm going to share with you today so you can replicate this strategy and use it for all of your own deals. So phase 1 is the strategy, and this really just comes down to having the right education and knowledge before you start doing any deals. So in essence, our strategy is relatively simple. We're trying to find land that's unutilized, owned by typically mum and dad investors that have owned the property for many years. And we're trying to find these locations typically around 1 hour from major towns. We want to make sure that it's got development potential, so it's actually zoned to be developed. And typically we're looking at around 10 hectares of land to develop these properties. And we want to make sure that there's no hazardous overlays, so things like flood or environmental overlays. Then we want to put down a small deposit that allows us to control the property. So we're not actually purchasing the property, we're just paying a small fee to control the property, and the duration of that control period, we're going to do a development approval. So this could be for 50 lots, it could be for 100 lots, but we're essentially looking at doing a large lot subdivision residential development, just getting the value increase by doing the planning approval on paper. So we're not doing any construction works, it's all through the approval itself and just generating that value over that long period of time. Then we want to also find a buyer to buy this property. So we want to talk to agents, we want to talk to valuers and get connected with people that are actually interested in buying a large development that's already stamped, ready to go, and we're doing the dirty work. This is stuff that developers don't like to do. They don't want to go door knock houses, talk to owners directly. They want to find a site that has the approval already online and just buy it directly online. So they're ready to pay a premium price. So what we're doing is we're essentially trying to find these sites that are unutilized, that don't have the approvals, get them stamped, ready to go, and then sell it to these developers for a premium. All right, phase 2 is actually going out and finding the site. So for this particular site, it was actually online for listing. So it was online for over 1,000 days as this large mixed-use development site. In total, this site was around 20 hectares. However, it was currently zoned mixed use, so more of like a commercial or mixed of residential commercial development. However, during the education phase, we found that this project was being rezoned by the local council. It was changing from fully mixed use to partly mixed use, but mostly residential. This then allowed us to do a residential development. So we got the site under contract and we looked at doing a large-scale residential development site on this, and in our draft sort of plan we had an envision for maybe like 200 houses for this project. So we're able to find it literally on market but then negotiate off market directly with the owner. Typically though, we're not going to find a lot of these sites online, and if we do, it's going to be a lot harder to negotiate. So we want to directly outreach to owners. So what I do is I use online mapping softwares to try to find sites that have this development potential, that are around that 10 hectares, 1 hour away from town. I'll make a big CRM of all the sites I have of interest, and then I'll look up the owner's details directly, or even door knock the owners so I can get in touch with them and try and negotiate terms, because that's when it comes more like a business. It's not just a straightforward real estate deal. We're trying to engineer and create value before we buy this property. And if we have a middleman like an agent who's being involved that wants to get paid straight away, it's going to become a lot more difficult. We want to create a win-win situation for both the seller and ourselves. And what I mean by that is typically we can actually pay the seller quite a bit more than what their property is worth if they give us the time to get the development approval, because obviously we're going to benefit from selling it to a developer, but we can also pay the owner a lot more because they're giving us that time and that ability to get an uplift. Phase 3 is then negotiation. So we want to work out a deal with the owner, and not just in regards to price, but also terms. So for this property, it was for sale for 1,000 days for $5.5 million as this mixed-use development. So we went directly to the owner and we ended up striking a deal at $4.5 million. Now at the time, I didn't have $4.5 million. So that's why the terms are so important. And what I mean by terms is the ability to pay a small deposit and get a long period of time to actually settle on that property. In this case scenario, I was able to negotiate a deal where it was subject to getting the approval, which is what I recommend for most people. So we find a site and we say, look, we will buy your property, but we need to get this development approval first. And it is contingent based on us actually getting that development approval. So it worked out to be roughly 18 to 24 months in this terms, which allowed us to get the development approval, which we confirmed with the town planners was enough time. Additionally, we also want to make sure that we get a due diligence period. I am one of the biggest believers of due diligence. You should never go unconditional on a property or look at buying a property until you've done your due diligence. Now, we can do a lot of research in the education phase, in the site finding phase, but we want to make sure that once it's under contract, we have a due diligence period. Typically, I'm looking at around 60 days, 90 days, or even longer the better. That way we can engage some professional consultants to actually come on board to do the due diligence on this project. So in this project, I was able to negotiate about 3 months of due diligence. Again, just paying a small fee that is refundable. So if we don't proceed during the due diligence period, we get that deposit back and we make sure that this project's going to be successful. So phase 4 is the due diligence period. So as I mentioned, in this project here, we managed to get 3 months of due diligence. So the first thing that we did was we engaged a town planner and we said we want to create a concept plan for what this project has the potential to build. So we did a plan for 200 houses, and then we also engaged a few other consultants. So things like engineers, architects, ecology, all the way through for whatever the overlays were on this project. So if it had some flooding, we would engage a consultant to review that flooding as a desktop analysis. So these preliminary reports don't cost too much money. They're not a full going out to the site doing a full report, but it's a very high level desktop analysis, but it gives us enough information to proceed with the site. So once we got all those reports and we did the master plan together, we then went and met with the local council and we presented them this envision that we had for the project. And we said, hey, look, we think this site would be a really good development to build a 200 house estate. We've done our initial plans. We would love your feedback. From that meeting, the council gave us a full report on what they think on the project. What were the good things? What were the bad things? Are these bad things able to be changed once we actually go ahead and do the approval? That then gave us enough confidence from a planning perspective that we could get the site approved. Then we wanted to work out, okay, if we get this site approved, what's it actually going to be worth with the development approval? So for that, we engaged a few people. We engaged a valuer, we engaged a local agent that sells development sites in the area, and we also did our own feasibility on the site. So all those three things came back at around $10 million. So we knew that, okay, this portion of land, which took up about 80 to 90% of the site, we could hypothetically get it approved and then sell it for around $10 million. So because we had under contract at $4.5 million, we knew that there was a big uplift in the potential of this site. So phase 5 is actually doing the development approval. So in the due diligence period, we were pretty set on doing this 200 lot estate. However, we actually ended up deciding to do a 188 home over 50s lifestyle village. So sort of like an early retirement living. And we decided this because there was a major need in town. There was end buyers that would pay even more than $10 million if we were able to get this approved. So the first thing that we do in the DA period is we get all the consultants needed and we have a big town meeting in our office here. And we said, okay, what's everyone's fees going to be? What's the timeline for the project? And we now move into a bit of a project manager role. So we want to make sure that the consultants are doing their jobs, that everyone's working together, and that we're going to get this project approved within our dedicated timeline. Because if it goes over, then we're going to lose this site. And we want to make sure that it stays within our budget, that things don't blow out. But with every deal, there's always something that moves. So that's why it's really important to have a bit of a contingency as well. And that's why I like these kind of deals. It's like we can get a 2x return or even 4x return on what we're buying these sites for. So therefore, we know there's a lot of profit margin in it as well. So if we lose some properties, if things drag out, there's enough profit margin. But if we're targeting small scale development sites like a 1 into 10 lot or something like that, then there's not much profit there, which is going to eat into our end margins as well. So the development application phase is broken down into several steps. You've obviously got the first initial phase where we need to compile all the reports. We then need to submit it to council. We pay the council fees, and then it goes through their assessment periods. Every council across Australia has different assessment periods, but essentially this could take around 6 to 12 or even longer months to get this approved. So the council assess it, they send back their information requests, essentially asking for more information, make changes, get more updated reports. Then we reply to those, and then it managed to get approved. So phase 6 is actually getting the development approval, which adds all the value to that property. We were lucky enough to get an approval for 188 home over 50s village, which took up again about 80% of this project. And then we were able to get an updated valuation based on that approval, which came back at $11 million. Now, it's quite important whilst you're at the tail end of getting that development approval to start talking to your end buyers. So we started reaching out to over 50s operators and let them know that we were actually doing an approval for this over 50s in this town, about half an hour west of the Gold Coast. And we had a lot of interest, and we would look to try secure someone to buy the site before we even had to pay the money to settle on the project. So we wanted to try sell the site before settling. If not, have someone very close to, after settling the site, actually purchasing the site off us to try and lock in a buyer. So phase 7 is the settlement and the sale of the project. Now, the most important thing here that I want to share is that once you've got that development approval, that then becomes a big binding asset to getting financing from a third-party bank. So with land, it's a bit different to buying a house. Most funders will look at what's the valuation of the land. And with the development approval, the land valuation was now $11 million. And typically these funds will lend around 50-60% of the value of that land. Because it's not a cash producing asset, they capitalize the interest, typically around 10% per annum. So let's just say we needed $5 million to settle this site. It was in that 50 to 60% range. They would then capitalize that 10% interest, so that's another $500,000, and they would essentially loan us $5.5 million. Now that would include the interest, but it would allow us the money to settle on this project. Now the reason that we had to settle on this project was because it actually came with other properties on this site. So there was another 5 properties on this project: a childcare site, a retail site, a warehouse site, and 2 residential developments as well, totaling another $10 million in value. So what we did was we used the bank finance to settle this site. We were able to then on-sell the over 50 section to an operator for $11 million. We then had all these other projects. We've sold off a couple of them already. We sold the childcare center for $2.365 million. And the other sites we're now developing as well, because we were able to sell off that portion and technically buy all these other sites for free. And it's a really good way to set you up to either go develop these sites or sell them. It's really up to the end buyer, but it's one of the best ways to develop property or just make money by putting a small deposit down, increasing the value with the approval over a long period of time. So that was one of my first early projects. Fast forward another 5, 6, 7 years, I'm now doing these projects still today. And people said, look, you got lucky with that project. You just found a site that was very undervalued. However, these sites are always out there, especially in Australia, where the population's constantly increasing. The councils and the states have the obligation to increase the zoning of land to cater for the growing population. So I'm constantly spending every day looking at different opportunities in different areas. I'm trying to find the exact same deal multiple times over. Where can we build these residential developments to cater for the population, to try and lower the average property houses that are skyrocketing as well? Land is such a crucial asset. We spend a lot of time looking at building costs going up, but if we can rezone more land and increase the supply of land, it's also going to bring down the median house price, which is great for people looking to buy property. As of today, I've done around 1,200 dwellings from start to finish, to getting the approval to selling to developers. As of today, I'm working on sites around 450 homes, and I'm using the exact same techniques. I'm finding sites off market, talking to owners directly, and working out a deal where I can put a small deposit down, get enough time to get the approval, and either on-sell the project for a massive gain or just actually develop the project as well, because it sets you up to have a lot of equity which you can then use to either finance or on-sell the project without having all the stress of, competing with other developers, buying sites online. It's a strategy that you can implement for off-market acquisitions and literally start making money with no money. If you've got the ability to find these deals, get them under control for a small fee, you can then hit up joint venture parties like myself or other people in the real estate game. Money is never the issue. If you can show someone, I've got this site under contract for X amount, it's going to cost me X amount, however, it's going to be worth double, triple, 4 times the value, getting funds for someone to fund the deposits, the approvals, all that is never an issue. Everyone thinks it's too complicated. And look, the process is simple, but the execution is difficult. However, that's how you can generate lots more returns than just a typical commercial or residential asset where you need lots of money to invest. It's more passive, it's more secure, and that's great. But we're over here trying to engineer that value. I've got the time, I've got the energy, I can go door knock owners, I can put these deals together because I know the returns are going to be far greater. And yes, it's going to be more difficult. I might have to look at hundreds of properties to actually find one that stacks up, but I know I'm going to get a much better return. And I know that I've got the education, the energy to go out and do these deals. And I believe lots of other people can do it as well. If you enjoyed this video, we're just really getting started on this channel. We're going to be sharing more real estate educational content and behind the scenes of deals that we're working on as well. We'd love your support if you can like, subscribe, join the journey, and we'll see you on the next one.